Welcome sports fans to GenX Classic Sports, where we bring the nostalgia of our sports-filled youth into the present day. Grab your favorite retro jersey, crack open a cold one, and let's stroll down memory lane together.
Welcome back, everyone, to GenX Classic Sports. I'm your host, Sean Enos, and before we get started today, I thought I'd give a few shout-outs to some listeners that I'm seeing out there when I do some of the behind-the-scenes research on where the podcast is going and everything. So hello to Bigelow, Arkansas. Hello to Houston, Texas. Hello to Boardman, Oregon. And hello to Decatur, Alabama. Whoever that group of people might be, you're in the top 4 or 5 listeners on one of the statistical app things that I look at. So thank you very much for listening to those folks. All right, today we're going to do a little bit of a blend of basketball and football because today we're talking about Charlie Ward. If you grew up in the 1970s and 1980s, you remember a time when the phrase two-sport athlete actually meant something. Not just a guy who played pickup basketball in the offseason, not some quarterback or pitcher who hit golf balls on Instagram. We're talking about real, competitive, elite level two-sport athletes. Think Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders, both of whom we've already talked about on here, and it won't be the last time. Those kind of guys. And we will cover more guys on the show in the future who were multi-sport guys. And these are guys who didn't just try another sport. They actually thrived in whatever other sport it was. And then there's Charlie Ward, who for Gen X threw us a curveball, am I right? And we'll talk about what that curveball was. Don't pardon the pun, right? He's a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback who never played a down in the NFL by choice. He called his own shots, and good for him. Good for you, Charlie Ward. Charlie took control of his own situation, and instead of playing in the NFL, he became a first-round NBA draft pick, and he ended up carving out a 12-year professional basketball career instead of what, might have been a frustrating career in the NFL, and an NFL that didn't really appreciate his skill set back then. I'm quite sure it would now 100%. But so Charlie Ward's story isn't a what if, and it's not a cautionary tale. Not at all. Charlie Ward's story is of a guy who was so good at 2 different sports that he got to choose his own beginning, his own middle, and his own ending. And for Gen X fans who grew up before specialization killed versatility, don't get me started on that, Charlie Ward represents something that we really don't see much of anymore. Charlie Ward was born in 1970 in Thomasville, Georgia. He's 55 years old or so right now, and like so many great athletes of that era, he wasn't groomed from age 7 to play one position in just one sport. No, he played everything. And that's a theme that you hear very often with Gen X era athletes. They mostly seem to be multi-sport guys. Football, basketball, baseball. By the time Charlie reached Thomas County Central High School, it was obvious he wasn't just athletic, he was also super smart. And on the field and on the court, he wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, he wasn't cocky. He was just really efficient at what he did. He was very composed in what he did, and he was always in control, which is what you want and need in your leader and your best player. I don't care what sport it is, okay? In high school football, he led his team to state championships, and he earned Georgia Player of the Year honors. And in basketball, he was already showing the traits that would define his future: court vision, calm, decision-making, leadership, that kind of stuff. But here's the key thing to remember on all of that. Charlie Ward was not viewed necessarily as one of those can't-miss quarterback prospects. He wasn't 6'5". He's listed at 6'2", but I think most people believed he was more in the 6'1" range. I don't know that for a fact, but most quarterbacks, they lie about a little bit. So he was probably 6'2" at best, but probably 6'1", maybe 6 feet and some change. He didn't have a cannon of an arm, at least from the research that I did. But, I don't believe that. I don't remember that being an issue with Charlie. I think he had more than an adequate arm throwing a football. I just don't believe that they really could have faulted him for his arm. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought he had plenty of arm. And so he didn't fit the NFL prototype even in high school. And so when he chose Florida State to continue his athletic career in college, it wasn't with any major expectation that he'd become a college football legend necessarily. It was just simply, the next step in the process for Charlie. And he arrived in Florida State in 1989. And from day one, he did something, unthinkable, really. He played 2 Division I sports at the same time. I say unthinkable. There were other guys that have done it before and since, but that is very difficult to do. He played basketball along with football, not as a novelty, and this wasn't some marketing stunt. He was on the football team and on the basketball team where he played with several future NBA players. Bob Sura, Doug Edwards, and Sam Cassell were all on that Florida State team with him. As a freshman football player, he redshirted, and he was learning the position behind, I believe their established quarterback at that time was Casey Weldon, if I'm not mistaken. But basketball, he started out kind of contributing, running the offense, defending guards, making the smart passes, the smart plays, getting them into their offense. And that's where the theme of Charlie Ward really starts to take shape, because while everyone else was chasing, highlights, Charlie was mastering his craft under control. And in football, that means he learned some patience. And in basketball, he learned how to play within the rhythm of the offense that he was running. And those skills, they really feed off of each other. Eventually, Charlie became the starting quarterback at Florida State, I think in 1992. But he was also helping the Seminoles to the NCAA tournament in basketball. So think about that for a moment. Those 2 sports are consecutive to each other. So he's playing football into basketball season easily. He has no camp, so to speak, with his basketball teammates. He's a full contact quarterback in the fall, and he's point guard in the winter. And he's probably having to do some mental work all year round, studying for both sports. So it wasn't just that it's a physical grind. It was a mental endurance feat at the highest level as much as anything else, because the guy is the point guard and the quarterback. So once Charlie took over as Florida State's quarterback, everything changed for the better for him. In 1992, his first year as a starter, he took Florida State to the brink of a national championship with an 11-1 record and a number 2 final AP poll ranking behind that Gene Stallings Alabama team. Do you remember that 1992 Alabama team? I saw them play live, and man, they looked like they could have won some divisions in the NFL that year. Florida State, with Charlie, they beat Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. And so their record ended up 11-1, and Charlie finished second in the Heisman Trophy voting that year. And back then, the Heisman Trophy, people don't want to hear this, but it was such a much bigger deal. It just was. Now, here's some, like an intangible maybe that gets lost over time. Charlie Ward wasn't dominating games with his athleticism. For football, he was dissecting defenses. He made the right reads. He avoided mistakes. He extended plays just long enough, to get positive yardage. And I'm not saying he couldn't run. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying he was a think pass first kind of guy. And all the while still playing basketball, of course, running an offense there too, guarding taller, quicker players sometimes, making those split-second decisions that have to be made on the basketball court. And, of course, he's also the quarterback. So the patience of a point guard, the vision of the floor general, the understanding of spacing and timing. He wasn't just a quarterback who happened to play basketball. He was a basketball mind who also played quarterback. And that makes sense for the point guard because the point guard is the equivalent of the quarterback in basketball. And sports are so much about spacing. And probably two of the sports that it's most important in would be football and basketball. And Charlie as the quarterback and Charlie as the point guard, he has the same point of view when his team has the ball. He's worried about everybody's spacing and timing. And so it makes complete sense to me that the guy would be good at both. However, it also makes sense to me that he'd be a heck of a grinder and a phenomenal athlete to start with, right? Now, here comes 1993, Charlie's senior year. This was one of the great seasons in college football history because listen to Charlie's numbers. He threw for over 3,000 yards, and he completed 70% of his passes, or very close to that. And he threw 27 touchdowns against just 4 interceptions. Now, Bill Parcells used to say, I believe he's the one I heard say this, that for a quarterback should have 3 times as many touchdowns as interceptions. And so if that's true, look at Charlie Ward's numbers, 27 TDs and only 4 interceptions. So well done, Charlie Ward. That was a fantastic ratio for somebody who threw for 3,000 yards. That is phenomenal. And this is in an era where quarterbacks took real hits. This was 93 now. Quarterbacks were taking some hits then, and defensive backs were allowed to punish the receivers a lot more than they seem to be able to now. So that year, Florida State went 11-1 in the regular season with only a 7-point loss on the road to Notre Dame, who was ranked number 2 at the time. So they went 11-1, and they finally broke through, and they won their national championship that season with an 18-16 Orange Bowl victory over Nebraska. Bobby Bowden, national title. Charlie Ward, national title. And, of course, this was in 94 after the calendar flipped over. So 93 regular season, 94 was when the game was played. And they won that national championship behind Charlie. Now, Charlie did a little more. The team, obviously, with the national championship, that's awesome. But listen to the hardware that Charlie brought home that year. First of all, he won the Heisman Trophy. Okay, he won the Heisman Trophy and everything else. He won the Davy O'Brien Award, the Walter Camp Player of the Year, the Johnny Unitas Golden Arm, the Sullivan Award. So what kind of season did this guy have? The college football national championship with a 12-1 record, and all of that individual hardware, including the Heisman Trophy. Way to go, Charlie Ward. That was a heck of a season for anybody. That season, Florida State beat teams ranked number 21, number 13, number 3, number 15, number 7, and number 2. And they only lost that game to number 2 ranked Notre Dame on the road only by 7 points. Now, Charlie didn't start until his final couple of seasons, but I want you to listen to the records. This says a lot about Bobby Bowden, if nothing else, but I want you to know that at least Charlie was there during this streak. Listen to the records of these Florida State teams. 10-2, finished 4th in the country. 11-2, finished 4th in the country. 11-1, finished runner-up to the national championship in 1992. 1993, 12-1, the national championship. So they were ranked 4th, 2nd, and 1st 4 years in a row there, and they never won fewer than 10 games. And their overall record was 44-6 during that span. That is some kind of football. I remember that, man. Bobby Bowden was rolling back then. And so they win the national championship in football, and then Charlie just goes back to campus and plays basketball. And that's the part that kind of still feels special today, because other Heisman Trophy winners normally would be preparing for the draft. They would not be in school in the spring. They would go to Dallas or Los Angeles or Miami or somewhere, and they would be working with private tutors on their speed, their strength, their motion, if they were a quarterback, their throwing motion, all that stuff. No, Charlie may have been doing some of that, but if he did, it was in between basketball games and practices, because Charlie was running the fast break there for Florida State. He was defending. He was leading his teammates on the floor. He was winning in another sport, and not because of, this wasn't any kind of specialization. This was just a guy being really good at 2 jobs. Florida State, Charlie at Florida State, He held the record for steals in a game with 9. He had 9 steals in one game. He had 236 career steals, and he ranks 6th all time for the assists with the Seminoles with 396. So he wasn't a big scorer. That's not what he did. But let's talk about some of the things the team did while he was playing basketball. In 1993, they were the Southeast Regional. They made it to the Southeast Regional Finals where they lost to Kentucky. 1992, they made it to the Sweet 16. In 1991, Charlie Ward made the game-winning shot in the Metro Conference Championship game over Louisville. In 1993, he played in just 16 games, but averaged 10 points and 5 assists. Not bad at all. So this wasn't about scoring. He wasn't a scoring machine. This was about being a leader and a defender and playing tough. His career, 91 basketball games. He started 52 of those. He averaged 30 minutes a game, 8 points, 2.5 steals, 4.5 assists, and 3 rebounds. Now, nobody's going to get excited over those numbers, but they're pretty solid, honestly, and he did the intangibles. After the 1993 season, the world assumed, and I was one of them, I assumed Charlie Ward was going to head to the NFL, but he didn't. He made it very clear he was a quarterback or he wasn't going to play football. And I read somewhere where he said he deserved to be a first-round pick. And so there was a little bit of chatter that NFL teams were probably uncomfortable with his height, being less than 6'2", probably. And some seem to think he had an issue with arm strength. I don't, but some people seem to. And so that maybe caused NFL teams to not be quite as enthusiastic about drafting him before what I'm about to tell you happened in a minute. So there were teams already spooked about him because he did have an option to play basketball, it seemed. And maybe some NFL teams thought he'd be disgruntled being a backup if they in other words, if they didn't believe in him as a starter, but thought, man, this guy we could develop into a fantastic backup. They didn't want him disgruntled in that role. And so he and his people were told, from what I've gathered, that he was likely a 3rd to 5th round NFL draft pick. So apparently Charlie and his camp, I don't know if that was parents, agent, I have no idea, but they got word out that if you're not drafting me in the first round of the NFL draft, don't bother. Just do not bother. And he believed he deserved it because he believed he had the ability and he had won the Heisman and led his team to a national championship. And so Charlie made a decision that shocked me and everybody else probably that was paying attention, which was, hey, I'm not even going to the NFL. And so he told teams don't draft him. And leverage gives you options, okay? And he had the leverage of that much ability in 2 sports. So he didn't beg and he didn't compromise from anything from anybody. He just pivoted. Dude just said, fine. So I'll do something else. So in the 1994 NBA draft, the New York Knicks selected him 26th overall in the first round. So this Heisman Trophy winner threw everybody a curveball. That's a terrible analogy, but you know what I mean. He really surprised some people by going to the NBA as a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. So to this day, Charlie Ward remains the only Heisman Trophy winner to ever play in the NBA. And I always try to bring you some trivia, and that was a good one right there. And I don't mean try out, and I don't mean play in an exhibition game. Play, contribute, and last over a decade in the sport. Heisman Trophy winner. Now, also, I'm bringing you some bonus trivia as well. Charlie was one of only 3 Heisman Trophy winners to ever play professional ball in another sports league. Let me say that again. Only 3 people. Charlie's one of them. Only 3 athletes ever won a Heisman Trophy and played professionally in another sport, another professional league. We've already talked about Charlie, so that's obvious. The other one we've already talked about, which was Bo Jackson in 1985, won the Heisman Trophy, ended up playing professional, not just minor league. He played pro ball, of course, for the Kansas City Royals, Chicago White Sox, I think the Anaheim Angels. Okay, and then way back in 1950, and I'm going to look up some information about this guy. He doesn't really fit the Gen X career or lifespan profile, but maybe I can do some way back tributes to some of these awesome athletes. Vic Janowitz in 1950 won the Heisman Trophy, but he also played catcher in Major League Baseball for the Pirates. So there you go. There's your trivia and your double and your bonus trivia on the Heisman Trophy winners playing other professional sports. So Charlie ended up in the NBA, and that mirrored kind of what he had done in his football career, honestly. He wasn't that flashy or loud and bombastic and all that, and he didn't chase headlines and all that. He was playing for the Knicks for the legend himself, Pat Riley. And at first, he didn't play much. I don't know what Pat Riley's reasoning was. Maybe he just thought he wasn't ready, and that's fine. So he didn't play as much. But then Jeff Van Gundy took over after Pat Riley exited as coach. And Van Gundy gave him his shot to play, and he latched on to that, and he stayed out there. So much more of his game was obvious other than stats. With the Knicks, he was a reliable point guard for them, defending, distributing the ball, running the offense, being calm, all that kind of stuff, leadership. In 1999, he was part of the legendary 8th-seeded Knicks team that reached the NBA Finals, and the Knicks fans loved them some Charlie Ward. He was a grinder, and that's what they loved about him. He ended up being famous for his floor leadership and reliability, and he actually greatly improved his three-point shooting. And he had a run with that, and he was known for his smarts and all those other things. And that 1999 team lost to the Spurs in the NBA Finals. But yeah, Charlie emerged as a pretty good three-point shooter, as it turns out, on top of all the other things he brought to the table. I didn't write it down, but I read it somewhere. I believe he finished third or fourth in the NBA three-point shooting All-Star Weekend Challenge one year. So he knew what he was doing shooting the rock, obviously. So think about that. A Heisman Trophy winning quarterback running an NBA offense, 82 games a year plus the playoffs plus the exhibition season. We're talking 100 games a year. And he ended up in the finals doing that. He later played for the Phoenix Suns, the Houston Rockets, and he ended up extending his career overall to 12 seasons. So good for you, Charlie Ward, getting in the pension plan completely, man. But he did have some injuries that eventually caught up with him, and he ended up retiring because of his injuries after 12 seasons. And, man, Charlie didn't get by with hype. Charlie got by with skill and intelligence and competitive spirit and all those kinds of things that we love about our athletes. So Charlie Ward's story isn't just about success. It's about a version of sports that we really don't see anymore. A time when athletes weren't boxed into one path. A time when versatility was celebrated and not discouraged. And today, kids are told to specialize by middle school. We all know that's the truth. To give up one sport for another and to fit a mold. Some kids are told what position to play in what sport early on in life, and it never changes. It's kind of sad. Charlie Ward broke the mold. He didn't chase the NFL, at all costs, and he didn't abandon one dream for another. He just simply chose the path that fit his abilities and his mindset best, and that's probably his greatest accomplishment of all. Charlie Ward wasn't the flashiest two-sport star of the Gen X era, but he might have been the most complete. A national champion quarterback and a Heisman Trophy winner, a first-round NBA pick, and a 12-year professional basketball career. Now, guess what? On top of all of that I told you, on top of everything else I mentioned, he was also drafted not once, but twice in the Major League Baseball draft in 1993 and 94 by the Brewers and then the Yankees. That would have been his junior and senior years in college, despite not even playing baseball in college. He played it last in high school. But on top of everything else I told you about football and basketball, dude gets drafted twice for Major League Baseball. Unbelievable. And currently, in case you're wondering, Charlie did get into coaching. And he's currently the head basketball coach at Florida A&M and an HBCU. And from what I understand, he's turning the program around there. So good for Charlie. Charlie is a reminder for me of what sports used to be. Charlie's a reminder to me of the kids that grew up in small towns like I did, and you pretty much played minimum 2 sports. And if you weren't playing something for the school or for your little league, you were in somebody's yard playing. That's what Charlie sounds like to me. He played before everything got optimized, before everything got specialized, before versatility became a liability. Charlie Ward didn't just play 2 sports. He mastered them. And for Gen Xers like me, that's what makes his story absolutely timeless. And so that is the story of Charlie Ward, and I hope you enjoyed that. He was one of my favorites back then, and I really enjoyed looking up some of the specifics on Charlie Ward's career. If you enjoyed that, hey, come back next week. We'll have some more basketball content. In the meantime, will you give us a like, give us a comment? Not hard to reach if you have a request for a subject to cover. What we try to do is cover athletes who either did their thing during Gen X, are Gen Xers themselves, that athletes, teams, that events, that kind of thing. And so, we'll talk to you again in another week. This has been Sean Enos for GenX Classic Sports, and I appreciate you spending your time with us today. We'll see you in a week.
Thank you for joining us on GenX Classic Sports, where nostalgia meets the thrill of the game. Tune in next time for more insightful discussions and memorable moments, brought to you by Pine Street Productions. Until then, stay passionate about sports and keep the memories alive.